So welcome everybody to session 30 of Beers with Engineers. Will and I's favorite work day of the month when we have them. There's some months we skip it, but love doing this. Love the community, love all the folks that join us. So thanks very much for joining us. So as always, um, we talk about things that might not be released yet. Today's discussion is in the innovation lab still, so it's not generally available. So all of these forward-looking statements are here, and we cannot guarantee that anything that we show is going to be, generally released exactly the way it is. So don't necessarily make purchasing decisions or stock buying decisions based on anything that we talk about here or share today. This is primarily mostly for everybody to dive into the technical components of it. So that being said, we usually try and keep it to a fairly informal agenda, right? We talk about why Will and I decided to start this. We talk about who we are. We've added in a new section today about news and updates because we got some components we want to talk about, and we dive right into the technology. And then, of course, we always leave room at the end for questions and answers. So why do we do this? Right? The goal of this is really twofold, right? One is to bring together ServiceNow customers who are kind of like moving along the cloud journey and give them a place to kind of talk about and understand what the capabilities are with ServiceNow and that cloud native environment. So it's really about building the community and talking about how do we solve problems for customers in the cloud native space. So who are we? Mike Gallagher. I am an ITOM pre-sale specialist. I should probably update that little experience in line to be closer to 30 now because I have to admit it, I'm getting old. And I am a big fan of IT operations management. I play around a lot with Kubernetes. I love talking about the CMDB and the value that it provides. And I'm a big proponent of the combination of that and IT asset management. My tagline both here and on my LinkedIn profile is that I just love to solve business problems effectively and efficiently with technology. That's really at its core what I'm all about. And on my personal time, I like to hang out with my family, like to hang out with my friends. While I'm doing that, it's generally playing board games, video games, or training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And today I found kind of a special thing. It's called the Chider by Schilling Ciders. It is a spiced chai apple cider. So I'm really excited to try this. It's out of a cider making company in my old stomping grounds of Auburn, Washington. So looking forward to it. Will, over to you.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. If we haven't met before, I'm Will Hallam. I'm a solution consultant on ServiceNow's ITOM focused COE team in the Americas. I've been working in different parts of technology for the better part of 30 years, and lately focusing a lot on IT operations, specifically a lot of the cloud native stuff. Just really enjoy building things that automate repetitive, drudgery type of activities so that more people can, focus their time on the really interesting stuff. In my spare time, I also enjoy hanging with my family. I play the occasional pickup hockey game and do enjoy video games quite a little bit. Today, I will be drinking a Krusty Krab New England IPA from Crooked Crab Brewing Company. See how long it takes for them to get legal action on that one. There we go.
All right, so let's dive in on some news and updates. So, couple of quick things. We are officially approved to do Beers with Engineers live at Knowledge 25 this year. Super excited about that. And But we're telling you all very early in the process because nothing else at this point has been finalized. Everything else is TBD. So we will continue to keep you posted through this process. And really importantly, this QR code over here will take you to our microsite for Beers with Engineers, where you can look at the past sessions, look at the recordings, sign up for any of the upcoming sessions, but also as we get closer to knowledge, we'll put some updates on there around, where we're going to be, how you can register, what the topic may be. There's also a couple more sessions between now and then as well. So we'll talk about it on each of the sessions as things go through as well. So, but we're really, really excited about that. Please, please, please come join us if at all possible, because we're looking forward to seeing you all. And then another quick note, this is just a quick side note, and I wanted to bring this up because I personally am a big lover of cloud native operations. It's something that we have talked about on this show, almost ad nauseum since the show started. And so it's kind of a big deal, in my opinion, that it's actually going to be renamed to the Kubernetes Visibility Agent, right? This is starting to take effect now. We're starting to see some of the documentation changing over to it. So I would start to change the nomenclature in your head as we start thinking about this. Frankly, I think Kubernetes Visibility Agent is a little more clear on what it does. And yes, as seen down here, new look, same great taste. It's same code base, same process. We're just renaming it to make it more clear. Will, anything to add on either of those topics?
Well, I just echo your excitement about the live session. We went actually the last couple times it was more of a seat of the pants thing. This time we're kind of right in the pipeline along with loads of other kind of sponsored activities and knowledge. So that means we should have things kind of sorted out well ahead of time because they're driving us based on deadlines that the event staff has. So we should have a pretty, each year it gets a little better, and this year is no different. It seems like it's really going to be kind of very closely tracked, and we should have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, so we won't be bribing AV people to stay late like we did last year.
Yeah.
Oh, that was interesting. So yeah, so looking forward to that. It's gonna be awesome.
All right. So Will is going to take us through the new cloud license estimator today. So Will, take it away. I'll run slides for you.
Thanks, man. Okay, so Cloud License Estimator, it's been in the innovation lab for a few months now. They just released actually an updated version. So the older version, which you can still step back to if you want to look at it, but you're not on X or Y yet, is available. You can just step back to the 1.0. The version that's out there now, I think it's like 1.1.2 or something like that, runs on Xanadu and Yokohama. They are planning for GA in the second quarter. Next slide. So what is it actually? What form does it take? What's involved with taking a look at it? It's a completely standalone plugin. It's not associated with or attached to any of the normal ITOM applications or dependencies. And that's on purpose because the idea is to provide kind of a quantum leap in terms of providing tools for estimating how many cloud CIs do we have out in our environment, kind of before you start pulling them into visibility. They're also, also a big part of this is to put tools in the hands of, your account teams that maybe, want to give you some guidance as to, okay, if you were to go with cloud discovery, here's what you would be looking at in terms of SU counts. The very kind of distant ancestor of Cloud License Estimator, some of you may have come across some just like very brief shell scripts in the past that your account team might have given you and said, here, run these against all your cloud accounts, and it'll give you an estimate of what you're looking at in terms of your cloud resources that would be discovered and put in your CMDB and contribute towards your subscription unit numbers. So this is just basically taking similar functionality, but putting it in something you can run on the platform without a lot of rigor, without having to, impose as much on your cloud teams, because previously it was very work intensive for enterprises that had a few cloud accounts or, lots of cloud accounts. They would have to go to their cloud team, say, can you run this against all the accounts? And, there was, a decent burden associated with doing that. And so all that has led us to a single plugin that you can install on your today, since it's an innovation lab, it would be eligible to install in any of your non-prod. Because it's an innovation lab, it doesn't support any of the gov or regulated cloud spaces yet. That is planned for the GA release, but the regulated spaces don't have Innovation Lab on their version of the ServiceNow store, so there's no way for them to get it in its current form anyway. So the that's kind of the main reason that rolling GovCloud and regulated cloud support into this version wasn't super high priority, but it is on the roadmap for the GA release. It does not require a mid. It won't use a mid. It makes all the API calls into the cloud provider from your ServiceNow instance. The idea being part of the use cases for this are people who have no ITOM, which means they may not be running discovery today, so they may not have mid servers. We didn't want to require that they provision a mid server just to do kind of an initial look at what their cloud footprint would look like in their CMDB. Currently supports AWS and Azure. The product team has been fielding. I've been party to requests on behalf of customers saying, hey, we'd really like GCP. I will say, if you are one of those customers or you have customers that are in GCP or expressing an interest in managing and getting visibility into their GCP estate, definitely feed that back to the product team, because that's kind of what's driving their feature roadmap, is the degree that, or the kind of the amount of customer interest in that particular capability. And so the latest version, one of the things that they added is the original version was focused on ITOM subscription unit counts. They've also added the cloud cost management rule set to what the tool calculates. So now not only will it estimate the ITOM subscription units that would result from pulling in a given cloud account or set of cloud accounts, but it will also apply CCM counts as well, and it gives it to you in a nice tabular format that you can export to a PDF, which just makes the collection and the consumption of all that data much more user friendly than any kind of precursors that we had that met this need.
Just really quickly, Mike Lurch had a question in the chat about the no mid requirement, and so it comes straight from the instance, but we got to make sure we have permission set up on the commercial cloud side, right? And that's actually was an important thing that I was going to point out, is some customers actually have their API endpoints kind of locked down to specific whitelisted IPs. So yeah, that's something that you'll need to work with the cloud management teams on the customer side to make sure that the instance IP address is whitelisted to be able to hit the API endpoints for the various different cloud providers, because it will be querying those APIs.
That is true. 100%. There are some aspects, and we'll get into them on the slide where we kind of go into known gotchas. There are some aspects that, if this were a discovery solution, would probably not be as palatable. But because the main idea behind this is that it's meant to be something you use temporarily as you're either onboarding a new set of cloud accounts or bringing a customer into the world of, ITOM visibility for the first time. So the idea is this would be something that gets set up and installed temporarily, and then once its purpose is fulfilled, then the things that need to be, the credentials, for example, that need to be set up on the cloud side could be torn down. Any kind of IP whitelisting that needs to be in place so it can make the API calls could be, cleaned up. So, yeah, that's one of them is because you're not running on a mid that would inherently potentially have that API access because it's running inside your cloud account. You potentially would need, some IP whitelisting, as well as there's a couple other things that I'll touch on here on this slide. So in its pre-release form, the documentation doesn't, the kind of official documentation doesn't include the explicit steps you need to follow on the cloud provider side to set up the permissions that are needed. There's a draft knowledge base article on support today. Because it's in draft mode, to get a look at what's in there, you would need to work with your account team because when it's in draft mode, only like ServiceNow people can actually read the document. It's a great document. I used it to set up my demo environment and it worked great, except for there was one piece of errata, which was there was a missing permission in the AWS policy that it directed me to create. But to its credit, the tool just directly called out this permission is missing, and I just added it in, and then my license reports ran absolutely fine. So I'd expect probably when this comes out of draft, this will be corrected, but I did want to call it out since that was something I experienced when I was walking through using the tool. I mentioned the cloud API endpoints. It's pointed at commercial cloud only, but that's just something to be aware of currently. That just by nature of kind of the more stringent requirements, Innovation Lab stuff doesn't go out to those regulated environments anyway. So it's kind of the nature of the nature of doing business in those more stringent areas. The AWS piece does require that a config aggregator be created. So a config aggregator just takes multiple feeds from different sub accounts and conglomerates the config data into one area. You don't have to create if you're just focused on a single sub account, like I was in my test setup. You can set up an aggregator that's just on that account and it'll work absolutely fine. But doing that was how they kind of minimize the different API calls and API endpoints and permissions that they would need, because a lot of what they can get is just from a single, hey, config service, give me all your CIs call. And so that kind of simplified the design. And again, since the intention is that this is going to be something you stand up, you do what you need to do, and then you clean it up. The thought was that even if a config aggregator doesn't exist, if it needs to be set up, that's a fairly straightforward process, and it can be torn down after the fact if for whatever reason the customer doesn't desire to have a config aggregator in that particular piece of the environment.
It's important to call out that a config aggregator has a cost associated with it on the AWS side of the house, right? So that might be a sticking point for certain customers. Totally makes sense. But another reason why, hey, this is really intended as a temporary solution. Hey, turn this on. You'll get some costs from it initially, but it'll be on for a short period of time while we do this license estimation, and then we shut it off again when it's done, if that's a concern.
Yeah, totally. We do hear periodically that config service is scrutinized in some environments and kind of minimized in the interest of minimizing cost. It does, it uses S3 storage, and it's making API calls with network traffic, which may incur cost. Usually the API stuff doesn't, though. It's usually data data exiting AWS, for example, that you get charged on. So you probably wouldn't see it. It would probably be more around the storage that potentially you'd see some amount of cost. But that's, you could do this and, kind of hopefully my demonstration will kind of get that across as well. You can do this pretty quickly. And so if that becomes a sticking point, you can probably say, if we have people on board to kind of do this, we could be done with it in a week's time. So the other thing to be aware of is similar to the service graph for AWS and the Azure for that matter. This does require at least one hard API key and secret, or in the case of Azure, like a service principal to be defined. It does have the ability within AWS. It can traverse an AWS org. So if you do want it to walk across your entire AWS org, you can do that without having to define API keys all over the place. But you do need that initial API key for it to communicate with either the main account directly or an accessor account, which can then assume a role in the main account, which can then assume roles in your member accounts. So again, the thinking there was because this is intended to be temporary. This was, the trade-off was worth kind of simplifying the code versus trying to build into it all of the various kind of assume role capabilities that we have with AWS Discovery.
Right.
And because number one, it's not a privileged, you don't have to give it a lot of permissions anyway. It's basically just permission to read configuration information. And then the second piece is it's temporary. Like I said, like a week, if you really wanted to, you could hustle through this in a week and then clean it all up.
Makes sense. All right.
All right, let's take a look at it.
I will stop sharing and you can start.
We go to questions. Any questions so far or comments? Anything?
We had a couple comments about how this sounds great. And then the one question around the API access and controls.
Cool.
But as always, we're a pretty informal gang. So if you have a question, feel free to come off mute and just jump right in.
Okay, so here's the store page. We'll include a link to that when we send out the slides. The two, since it's in Innovation Lab, there's nothing on the formal doc site for it yet, but there's pretty decent docs down here for setting up the instance side of things. And so, like I mentioned, there is this draft KB, which goes into a lot of detail that your cloud teams will probably appreciate. Talks about the specific API calls it's going to make, the specific permissions that it needs. I'm told by the product team this will come out of draft soon. They're just dotting some I's and crossing some T's since they just released a new version. They want to make sure it's still accurate. But in the meantime, you should be able to get access to this information by way of your account team. If you're, chomping at the bit to get this, to try this out, your account team should be able to pull the pertinent bits, specifically. Like I said, the real critical stuff is this AWS configuration piece where it actually has specific policy code that needs to get put into a permission policy for whatever user or role your cloud team is going to put out there for this tool to use. On the Azure side, it's a lot easier. You have a service principal, you give it the reader role, and that's essentially what the document says. That Azure, uh, full candor, Azure definitely makes it easier to do discovery type stuff between the ability to set up management groups and just assign permissions to a service principal to kind of walk across whatever it is you want it to see. Definitely appreciate that aspect of
It's so funny. I was an old school like Linux kid that was like Microsoft, for years, and I have been completely won over by Azure. I'm completely blown away at how nice it is to work with. So there's my little plug on the Azure side right now.
Yeah. Yeah, same. I do appreciate. I think Azure is a pretty solid, public cloud offering, and definitely has some things about it that make it easier to integrate with. So KB store page, you go to your fancy new app manager, or you could go to the old plugin list if you prefer the kind of the tried and true. But either way, here's what it looks like in the app listing. Like I said, it's just a single plugin, doesn't pull in any dependencies, very lightweight. You could have an instance. This instance here, I just spun up a fresh empty instance with no ITOM on it at all and just installed this plugin, and that's it. There were no, it didn't pull in a whole bunch of other plugins, and I had no entitlement kerfuffles of any kind. So appreciate that, because a lot of the use cases for this are going to be shops that maybe have no ITOM yet. And even in non-prod, there's no need to have them pull in a bunch of plugins just to get a count of what's out there. So once it's installed, there's a home page that shows up under cloud license estimator. So you go to the home page, and that's what this is here. So it has a little admonishment here. Make sure you set up your credentials. So if I hadn't already done that, I would navigate to my credential list and then populate the applicable service principal and or AWS credentials. So on the AWS side, I just created this AWS API key record here. And again, you always have to create at least one of these. If you're running, a more complicated environment than my single dinky kind of demo standalone AWS account, then you do have the ability to just have this one key be kind of the front door, and then you can just have it jump across to the different sub accounts by way of your AWS organization. And then I've also got my Azure Service Principal here. Same idea. Although Azure, again, we've talked about how Azure tends to make it a little bit a little easier for if you've got, multiple accounts in your environment. And so I've got a couple already set up, but I can walk through. That's the other nice thing, is it's basically each of these configurations is kind of standalone. So if you want to try some different settings, you can kind of have one that works, and then you can just go in and create a new one. And then when you select the cloud provider, it'll fill out additional um, fields for you to populate. So I'll just walk through creating a new one. And so then if it's a management account, you indicate thusly, select my credential. And in my case, I'm running the aggregator in the same account, but we provide flexibility. So if you've got, a lot of companies have, a utility sub account that stores things like a centralized config aggregator. So we have full support for that. And what is my config aggregator name? I'll look at the existing setup. So while that's loading, I can just show the show my service principal here on my Azure account.
Did your service principal role disappear?
I hope not. It'll make the subsequent steps in the demo much less interesting.
It's right, slightly complicated.
Who did I give reader to? Let's see. Oh, these are the privileged ones. That's why.
Uh, yeah, it should not necessarily be privileged.
So here's my reader role down here.
Yep.
And here's my um, service principal right here that I created specifically for the license estimator. Okay, so let me grab the setting for the name of the aggregator. Snow configuration aggregator. Got that, and it's running in US East 1. So essentially, this is the process for onboarding an AWS account. And then when you click this button, it'll save and immediately do a run, which is handy because it actually does some self-testing along the way when you click that, or you can always opt to just save the data and do the run later. So it's verified that it can get to the account, and now it's running the resource counts. So granted, this is a small, this is a small demo oriented AWS standalone account. So as far as the runtime, I wouldn't take this as necessarily, indicative of how long it would take to run in an actual fully, fleshed out environment. Even a single sub account that's actually doing real work is going to have more than the, you know, one or two dozen resources that I have. But it's essentially just walking through making API calls mostly against the AWS config service in the case of the AWS piece. So this is the scan status that'll come back. It'll give you, complete or failed or in progress as it kind of walks through. And then it produces this tabular list. So it counts, it counts things even if they're not necessarily licensable, just as a way of like, kind of validating that it is getting visibility the into the cloud account, even kind of the stuff that might not actually increment your subscription unit entitlements. And then you can see that it groups them into ITOM related and cloud cost management related because they do use slightly different calculation methods. And then this can be exported to Excel, CSV, JSON, PDF. The PDF is particularly kind of handy, especially compared with what we've kind of been used to, just getting this raw like dump of text from the old inventory scripts that we previously were using for this type of activity. So much, kind of much nicer to look at, much easier to deal with. Like as I showed, you can pull it directly into Excel or CSV for more if you want to do, additional calculation or correlation around the data. But it's just a lot more human readable, human friendly. So now the comparable experience for Azure is going to look pretty similar, but I'll walk through that. Really appreciate how much easier this makes the demo process because you can just keep creating records, and it's not like if you're trying to demo like discovery, you either have to delete the cloud service account, or because it ties back, it's indexed by the account ID, and if you want to have kind of parallel configurations, it's actually a little trickier than dealing with this tool, which is really nice. All right, let me get my existing values so I can just do a quick copy pasta. Account ID, and select my service principal and save and run. Okay, so that ran pretty quickly. My Azure account probably has even fewer resources than my AWS account does. But again, you see the breakdown. It goes by application type, indicates whether or not it's a licensable resource, and then gives you your counts. Oh, and each of them does have a log tab as well. So, for example, when I had my issue initially, because I was missing a permission on the AWS side.
Hold on. Before you dive into that, I
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to clarify something that I put in the chat. Um, Joshua Smith had asked, hey, does it show the types of CI so we can calculate the SU count and the SU matrix? And I was like, oh, yeah. And it shows you the ratio and everything. And that's not actually quite accurate. It shows you the ratio, but I don't see where, at least in that output, where it showed you, hey, this type of cloud resource is going to land in this type of CI, like this
Which
class of.
CI class it was going to go in? Is
Yeah.
that what you mean?
Yeah,
Um,
correct.
well, we can dig into that.
And
Let's
that actually seems like good feedback for the product team that that might be a
right.
while at.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, if that's not showing up, then that's definitely a piece of feedback that we can take to the product team because that.
I mean, having the ratio there already in the output is really nice, right? So, hey, right, here's your
Oh yeah,
license
100%.
count, here's your license count ratio per SU, right? Totally makes sense.
Yep.
But having another column in there that says, here's what CI class this will be,
Yep.
I think that would be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely agree. Yeah, I don't see it. So,
Yep.
we will take that back to the product team and say that that would be a useful property to track for these rows.
Yep. Good call out, Joshua.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, carry on.
Let's see. I think Firefox wants me to close some tabs because it's kind of sluggish here. There we go. So yeah, I was just going to say, um, so my first run against my AWS account, I believe had an issue. Oh, might have already cleaned it up. Let's see. No, okay, yeah. So this was my first run, and you know, if you recall on the kind of things to watch out for slide, I did call out a specific permission, and that permission, the first time I ran this, was missing, and I resulted in a failure on the resource count. And here's the error that it gave me. So it was easy enough to identify. It literally called out, "You're not authorized to perform ES colon list domain names." Um, so that may have been a new resource call that they, or a API call that they added on this version. And so the KB may just not be updated because of that. And that might be why, one of the reasons it's still, excuse me, still in draft mode. But yeah, and it's literally as simple as that. So if you do, there are, if you've got a more complex hierarchical AWS environment with like an AWS org and member accounts, and you want this to walk through all of those, then yeah, the cloud side setup is going to be a little different. You're going to have a role that you need to push out to those member accounts, and then a role that you'll need to define on your main account that your accessor account can call. And the accessor account can be the main account, but what we found over time is a lot of customers prefer to not really run stuff in their main account. But the main account is kind of the master of your org. So if you want to do AWS org stuff, you got to have some access into that main account, even if it's only just kind of a pass through. But, that caveat aside, this is literally all there is to it, to getting resource counts for yourself as a customer, for your customers as a ServiceNow um, team member or partner. And it's just worlds better than where we used to be. And, we've definitely, like I said, there's definitely been feedback. This is great. Can we get it for GCP? Because they're in the big three, right? And they're a popular cloud provider. So I think that message has been heard,
Mhm.
but it should definitely get amplified as applicable. And
Yep.
certainly the having the GA version available in those more stringently regulated cloud environments is certainly also on the radar.
The other piece
And
of feedback that I heard that was just brought up today, so this is not a like, hey, on the roadmap, so don't take this take this very much with a grain of salt. But it was a piece of feedback of, hey, this is awesome. Now that we have these credentials already set up and we have the account information and everything, is there a way to then take that and just use that as the basis for setting up discovery once they actually have purchased ITOM and are ready to go down that route? I think that's also a pretty smart idea. So that's another thing. Like, hey, if this seems like it would be a good idea, bubble that up, let us know, and we'll provide the feedback to the product team as well.
yep, yep, for sure. Um, whatever we can do to minimize rework is
Yep.
always a good thing, right? Um, so it does sound like that's gonna be something that's pursued as this offering matures.
Yep.
Um, and there was this feedback is all really valuable. I think there was originally the thought that this would, when it went GA, it would get wrapped up into the ITOM licensing utility.
Mhm.
Uh, it looks like they're steering away from that and going to keep it standalone, which I think was probably in response to some of the feedback saying, "Hey, it's great. We don't need a bunch of ITOM plugins installed just to run this." Right. So,
I think that's a big part of where its value comes from, right?
exactly.
I mean,
Exactly. Super lightweight, super quick to set up and run.
yep. My answer in the past when customers came to me and said, "How do I know how much all this is going to cost?" was, well, just set it up in a subprod instance and do it, right?
Yep.
But ultimately, that's double the amount of effort, right?
Right.
And that's a lot of work. right? So the ability to be able to do this with a lot less effort, very quickly, very cleanly, with no additional plugins necessary, right? As we all know, like once you install a plugin, sometimes it can be difficult to extricate it, right? So I think it's important for this to be nice and neat and easy and clean and simple to set up and generate those quick outputs. So excellent. Great stuff. Um, let me share the PowerPoint again really quickly. We'll kind of wrap things up.
Yeah, I see comment from Tom about getting it into Gov Community Cloud.
Mm.
Yeah, 100%. And that's definitely the plan. They're basically, they're going to make those API endpoints, abstract them out with variables, and um, the GA version is supposed to be available to those regulated customers, as well as if there's on-prem. I kind of, in my naivete, I kind of, the first time I heard about an on-prem customer that actually had like public cloud provider resources, it seemed a little incongruous, but it kind of makes sense because you've got different tiers of data, and I could see where they would maybe want, their ServiceNow instance on-prem, but also be making use of public cloud providers. AWS has GovCloud. We actually run the ServiceNow National Security Cloud environment actually runs on Azure's government cloud. So our kind of highest rated secure ServiceNow environment that we offer to our most sensitive users is actually running in the Azure government impact level 5 environment. So I could see where having that capability is going to be super valuable.
So really quickly, there was a question that popped in. First of all, Joshua, there's no dumb questions. Thanks for bringing questions, man. We love it. Second of all, does CLE have to be installed in a production instance to calculate SEUs? The answer is that is no. And not only that, you currently can't install it on a production instance because it's on the innovation lab, right? So if you were to go and do this right now, it can only go on a subprod instance. And honestly, like I kind of feel like between you, me, and the fence post, right? Unless it gets that convert to ITOM button, right? I would never install this on a prod instance, right? Because it's kind of a throwaway thing, right? I would put it on a subprod instance. I would connect it to the cloud infrastructure to get those counts, pull them in. Okay, cool. And then when I go and actually buy ITOM, then I would install ITOM and do that setup later, right? And then eventually migrate it up to prod. I wouldn't ever put CLE in prod. Again, unless it gets that convert to ITOM button. That then it's okay. Then that now there's value there. Cool. All right. So just really quickly, we'll run through a couple things. As always, we'll send out this deck to everybody after as part of the wrap up email. So you'll have all these links. Just really quickly call out the Beers with Engineers microsite that Will's done a whole ton of work on. We're going to continue updating that with new stuff, and we will keep you posted on the knowledge status via that as well. So go check it and take a look at it. And another quick thing before we jump to the Q&A is next month is going to be container software inventory on the 20th. So please go register for that. Come join us, right? The intention there is to understand how we're getting inventory of the software inside of the containers and using that from a software asset management use case to be able to track licensable pieces of software that are running inside of containers. So looking forward to chatting with you all about that then. Okay. That being said, I think we'll shift into Q&A mode and turn off the recording.